We are recording. There you go. Here, I'll jump out of the way. I don't want to be in the way.
Yeah, do it. There's nowhere to sit, really. All right, welcome to our session on analyzing data effectively. We're all of us up here are kind of co-presenting on this session. As a college, it has been a while since we have assessed our courses and submitted course assessments. So as we go through this session, we want to start thinking about the data that we're going to be collecting, how we're going to analyze and interpret that data ahead of submitting our fall assessment reports, which will be opening tomorrow. So this is a nice refresher for us. I think Sarah mentioned it earlier, but course assessment is important not only for HLC accreditation, but it's also important for improving our courses. As we collect and analyze our data accurately, we're able to draw conclusions from that data and then use that information to improve our courses and programs, and then just generally improve student learning. I'm really nervous because I'm not a data analysis expert. I'm just going to share with you kind of my experiences. We do have a data analysis expert that's going to talk to us, but honestly, the type of data that he works with is pretty different from the type of data that I work with and that you work with. So as we go through the session, there are going to be times when we ask for your input. So I'll have QR codes. Thank you. Thank you. So we'll have some QR codes that pop up, and actually it's just one to a Padlet, where as we're going through, if you could just consider like the types of data that you use in your courses, the tools that you use, and those kinds of things. And then we'll have like kind of pauses where we can discuss those. I was hoping we could kind of think of this as more of a learning experience. We can learn from each other because I don't do course assessment the same way you might do course assessment. And we can really learn from each other, from what things we do. There is no one size fits all for data analysis because depending on your program or your course, you're going to do it differently. All right, so what are we going to talk about? First, we're going to talk about data, different types of data. I've heard it already in one session today, so this is going to feel a little bit reviewy. Gordon is going to talk to us about the different types of data. But then something that's going to be new is he's going to talk about the types of data that IR can provide to you and how you can access that data, like what procedure or whoever you need to go through to get access to that data. We're not really going to talk about analyzing that data from IR because that's not what your course assessments should be. But data from IR can be used kind of supplemental, kind of on the side, to give you a bigger overall picture of what's happening in your courses and in your programs. We'll also look at tools for analyzing data. This is going to be basic. I am not, again, a data analysis expert. So I will share with you what tools I've used for analyzing different types of data. And then, of course, you will have opportunities to share what things have worked for you in the past. We'll also talk about interpretation of data, and Casey is actually going to lead us into that discussion. Because depending on what type of data you have and how you're analyzing it and what questions you're trying to answer with your data, you can draw really different conclusions from the same data set. So she's going to give us some insight into that data interpretation. And then in the end, I will give you just a real quick example of how I've done data analysis in my own courses. And then Patrick is going to do the same thing, but more of like the overall program perspective, which will be more useful for the program faculty out there. All right, so
we're going to do it all in less than an hour.
Yes. We're going to book it. All right, so all of the presentations that are happening today have learning outcomes associated. So at the end of this presentation, we are hoping you will at least be able to identify some methods for analyzing assessment data, describe some basic techniques for interpreting data, and we are all like doing our course assessments and analyzing this data through the lens of course improvement. Like that is our overall goal, is to improve our courses and improve student learning. And then we will also discuss some common challenges. There'll be an opportunity for you to share what are challenges you've encountered as you've analyzed data in the past.
This is interesting.
Is it not working? Others were having trouble with the,
It acts like I'm right clicking, but I'm left clicking.
Hmm.
I'll just.
maybe arrows.
Let me see if the arrow works. The arrow,
Okay.
perfect. Yes.
All right, so even though we want to focus on data and data analysis and interpretation here, you are not going to be able to analyze data well or even collect good data if you don't have a plan for assessment. So before you can even think about course assessments, we do recommend having a plan for assessment, ideally before the semester starts. That way, as you go through the semester, you can actually collect the data you need. I don't know if it's ever been you, but get to course assessment at the end of the semester and I'm like, oh crap, I handed that back. What am I gonna do now? So you wanna make sure you have a plan before the semester starts so you make sure you're collecting your data. So as you create your plan, first thing you need to know is your outcomes. I know we're all moving to assessing every outcome in every course every year. So make sure we know our outcomes, those outcomes. I know we did a lot of outcome work recently, but they should be student friendly and we should make sure they are measurable. As you consider your outcomes, you need to also consider how are you gonna determine if your students met that outcome? Did they achieve it or not? So if you don't have an accrediting body or some other external factor that's determining what your benchmark for student success is, you'll have to establish that. I think for myself, I always used 70%, whatever exam or assignment I'm using, if it's 70% or above, that is passing, and that's what my students need to get into their next courses. But depending again on your department, your accreditors, that might already be established. Next, as you consider your outcomes, you'll have to decide what measures you're going to use. So for your measures, I just wanted to remind you, alignment, make sure your measure aligns to your outcome, and rigor should align also to whatever verbs you're using in your outcomes. Those should align to your measure. As you're thinking about your measure, you can also think about how you're going to collect that data. If this data is coming from assignments that you're going to hand back to your students, make sure you collect that data so you have it even after you've handed those assignments back to your students. And then even thinking about your data analysis, what tools are you going to use? Are you going to be using rubrics, or are you going to be looking at exam scores? What are the specific measures and data that you're going to need? After you have your plan, then you just need to do it. Actually stick to that plan, follow that plan, remember what it's supposed to be. Don't forget it like I have done sometimes in the past. And then you'll have good data to analyze coming into the semester.
I'll put this up for a minute, right? Because we want them to
that's
be able to
permanent,
go to that.
All right, so Gordon is going to talk to us about different types of data. And as he's talking about that, if you don't mind, just think about the types of data that you collect, the types of data that you use in your classes. This QR code should take you to a Padlet with 3 columns, and each column is a different kind of topic that we're going to be talking about. So this one's the first column. And then after Gordon's finished, we'll have a time where we can share out. You guys can tell us, we can pull up the Padlet, but you can also share verbally the types of data that you use in your courses.
Be a draft for you too.
Sure.
Okay.
That works.
I'm just giving everybody a chance to get that. Like she said, this is not for the survey that's on the table. This is for a Padlet where we're gonna see all the comments you all made about the data that you are assessing. So,
So you can still participate in the conversation, even if you're
Yes.
shy.
I was just making sure all phones were, hang on. I want to make sure everyone has a chance. Good. Cool.
Everybody good?
There you go, Gordon.
All right, so thank you, Megan. I'll start off with that. I really do give not only Megan a lot of credit for where we're at today, but really the other two that I'm really presenting with, because she pretty much said I'm the data guy. And although that's true, I think what was really enlightening to me was having conversations with them over the past week or two, because one thing that she did say is the data that I work with and the data that I actually collect is much different than what you're probably going to work with or collect. It really is just a subset or something additional that I probably can provide to you all. I use a different tools for analysis, but I think basically what it boils down to is knowing what's available to you. We'll start with quantitative data, which I would say more than likely is 90% of what you're used to working with. Simply put, it's expressed in numbers. We can study historical trends, patterns, and really start to connect the dots between the data that we have, whether that's enrollment data, course success rates, or anything in that field. It is objective. So numerical numbers is actually going to show you where we are. And it can be used to, again, just to identify trends, patterns, or areas where students might be struggling. Some of the examples that we have are test scores or exam results, grades or percentage scores, or class participation measured by attendance or points. On the other hand, we take a more comprehensive approach when we start to talk about qualitative data. Quality or characteristics that you're not going to get the full picture when you're looking at numerical data. It's subjective and typically collected through open-ended responses, observations, or other forms of narratives that capture the student experience or understanding. Really, it's going to give us a deeper understanding of what we're looking at when we're looking at numerical data. I don't want to skip ahead too far when we talk about data interpretation, but you can't look at numbers and get the full picture. I think you've all probably been there. Examples include student feedback in surveys or evaluations. I really like number 2, responses to essay questions or reflective journals. I don't want to speak for you all, but we all know that all students don't learn the same. So I think when you actually get to talking about qualitative data, it does offer another perspective about how your students learn, and what situations they might learn the best in. Instructor observations of student behavior or engagement in class. Then you have group discussions or presentations assessed on content and creativity. So all of those are examples that numbers aren't going to give you information when you're talking about qualitative data. Data available from IR. I love this topic because, again, it's one area that really means the most to me. My perspective is from where I'm at right now, and I've spent the past year really trying to build out the IR office. It's crazy to think February will make 3 years since I've actually been at Mount West, but the first 2 years I was solely focused on IT and cybersecurity. We've had some transitions and really trying to make the best decisions for the college, but I basically transitioned to IR in February. In saying that, a lot of the data that I've been working with the past few months has really been at a college level or administrative purposes. So we've been looking at enrollment or retention rates. But where I'm at now is really wanting to open myself up to meet with faculty individually or meet with chairs and make sure or help you understand what you actually have access to. When I talk about program level data, again, Patrick's a good example, because as we were working on the grants for the Cybersecurity Center, there's things that we were breaking down enrollment trends over the last 5 or 6 years. We've, measured graduation rates, graduation counts, really looking to see, are students matriculating? Are they stopping out? Are we losing them? I know, again, a lot of times, so we're not all looking at the same data. I'll start there. But when we really want to, figure out program assessment, we do have to look at a collective picture of where have we been, where are we now, and where are we going?
So you'd probably be more with the 5-year review of the program level, your data.
Well, we can do 5 years, 10 years. I mean, we can go as far as you need it to go.
I just
So-
mean, you're not going to tell them about their students' grades. You're going to tell their
yeah.
students about their programs.
Exactly right.
The big picture. Yeah.
So, and so that is the big picture at the program level. But to your point, then we can move down to the course level or even course section level. So when you talk about course level data, the one that I gravitate towards the most is, again, because we have been looking at course success rates, or DFW, is really measuring student success, student performance, but, we can gain a lot from that, which again is quantitative data to see, is 70% of my class passing, 70% of my class failing. Again, that's straightforward information, but what we can do is we can say, okay, is this something that happened this semester? You might not have access yourself to go back and look at past semesters. That's where I can come in, and whether it's using linear regressions or charts or visual statistics, raw data, things like that, we can sit and look at that, and you might actually be able to say, oh, wow, I didn't understand or know that 2 years ago I had a 60% DFW rate, which again, I hope that we're not at that point, but those are some of the things, like I say, that I might be a resource to help you all look at. It's student demographic and performance correlations. My point there is really more on the qualitative side, because again, we know that our students come from all different walks of life. We have students that are first-year students. We have students that are first-generation students. We have parents. We have parents that have kids and children. How are they performing? Those are not necessarily things, again, that you might not have access to, that I can help with that. It will help tie into assessment when you're figuring out, okay, how are those students performing against our students that aren't first gen? Some of the other data that I don't have up here, but I'll really speak to, that I've been wanting to look at recently, is looking at different modality types, because as more people are teaching flex or hybrid courses or online courses, how are your students performing in those courses versus being in person? Nothing new that you're probably hearing, but I think it's, again, something that we should be looking at right now to figure out, are our students performing better online? Are they performing better in person? That way we can really figure out what we need to do next semester, next year, as we're setting up course offerings. Are our students performing better in evening courses or morning courses? I think there's a lot there that can really offer a lot of insights about student performance. And not to jump to say closing the loop, but really figuring out, are we looking at everything that we should be looking at? To answer that last question, really, how can faculty get access to this? And I had a good conversation with them, right, is I want you all to come directly to me. I think that's what I would prefer, because you know what you need. And I know we've had conversations about like the annual program snapshots or data that was given to you, but there's questions that you might have that either you don't get answered, or you get answered and it's not probably the way I would have described it. So, I always say the best place to get it is straight from the source. And then we can actually have conversations about, hey, this isn't matching what I thought it was. Okay, why is that? So I always like to say, if there is, data or conversations or things that you're thinking that you already want now, or, hey, I want to know, is it available? Call me, email me, let's set up a meeting, and go from there. Because like I say, I think there's a lot of information that we have access to that I want to give to you to empower you. And hopefully it might not even just help in assessment, but it might help in your, your everyday courses.
Will the institution set some benchmarks?
So we're working.
When we're looking at our snapshot, it's
Mhm.
hard to compare it with anything. It's like, well, how do we do compared to overall, or how do we do?
Are we gonna set
compared to the
benchmarks
other
for data?
technical career
Mhm.
class? So you just have something kind of floating
Mhm.
related to your own courses, your own program.
Great question. So not only are we working on that, but that's where I come to say is, I'm already having the conversation at an administrative level, but I want to speak directly to you all, because I'm not going to necessarily set benchmarks for what I think the benchmark should be. I don't like to operate that way. So that's in the coming months, some things that I'll either be reaching out to I've already been having conversations with the deans, but maybe even the chairs, to kind of push that conversation forward. Because like I say, you're already looking at the data. One other point to that is, like I say, you're getting those program snapshots. And one thing, some of the feedback that I got is, that's not always going to be what you need. I know the administration's looking at it from that standpoint, but again, that's only one perspective of what the data actually is. There are other angles and ways to look at the data. And I always like to say, to be very transparent in that, when you're looking at enrollment per se, there's tons of different ways you can look at enrollment. So you have to break down those questions to figure out what you actually are needing for yourself in your program. But yes, benchmarking is one thing that we actually, or I will be trying to work with more faculty on here in the coming months.
So that was the, oh, yeah, go ahead.
Just about, because I've been asking, because I know they run those reports about DF,
Mhm.
percentage of Ds and Fs. But do they ever run it on the opposite side of that? Like, all of the students get A's all the time, and maybe that information would be valuable to know what's going on for that, rather than the opposite.
So we,
That's right, that ever looked at.
excuse me. So I'm not sure. So if you've had the conversation maybe with the dean, I'm not really sure, but yes. I mean, the simple answer is yes. Course level, course section level. To be honest, very easy to pull that information.
I don't know if there were institutional, that kind of thing. I know definitely that,
Mhm.
Are you ever running a report right now that says how many A's, B's, C's, D's, F's, and then withdrawal?
because I know it pulls the DF, definitely,
Mhm.
for sure.
So, and I think what you're asking about is really grade frequency, not necessarily looking just at the DFW, but really grade frequencies. Yes, yeah, and it's another conversation that I did have even just recently is um, as I've transitioned more into the data, it's been a lot of running. It's been like, because again, I know it's either I've heard, well, we've not had data or it's not been shared or things like that before I got here. That's why I say I think I want to slow things down now and actually meet with you all to figure out what you need, because from administrative level, yes, we are looking at those things and it's been shared, but I don't necessarily know what's being given or, talked about to faculty.
Because obviously they're doing something right, so maybe
Mhm.
sharing kind of those ideas would be very
Mhm.
helpful.
Mhm. And to, and,
Their students are being very successful in what
yeah.
they're doing.
Mhm.
That's, I think, helpful information.
And I'll even say, I'll have a conversation with you. That way we can see what you might want, what you might need. But it's kind of why I'm here today is I want to encourage all of you really to pick something that you want, bless you, that you actually want or need, or, if you're wanting to venture down another path, let's talk.
Here's another QR code for a different question in the Padlet. What tools are you using in your data analysis?
Be clear, that's the second column, right?
That's the second.
Oh, sorry.
column.
So it's
Yeah.
the same Padlet you already had over, it's just the next question. on
Oh,
the-
I didn't know if this actually, oh, I mean, I know on what you were seeing, I've not used Padlet. I know you get to see all the different stuff.
Oh, yeah, no, this is what they say too.
So this is the exact same QR
It's the
code.
exact
Just
same.
go to the next question. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so
Sorry.
that first question, did anybody want to share the types of data they collect in their classes verbally?
No, I don't think anyone ever specifically said. But
Well,
you can read some stuff if you
Yeah,
want.
so some of the Padlet responses were expected, exams. Lots of us give exams, case studies, lab practicals, participation evidence, overall grades, post-lab assignments and quizzes, homework assignments, projects, exams. Does anybody have anything else to add? All right, so we're all, I think, working with very similar types of quantitative data. I think everybody listed quantitative data there. So we're working with numbers. That's the type of data we're working with mostly. That is the type of data that is going to be most useful as you write your course assessment reports and as you analyze your data to decide if your students have met their outcomes. So quantitative data, as a trained scientist, that's the only kind of data. There is no other kind. This is what I'm used to working with. I like numbers. And even when I get qualitative data, like I want internally to turn it into numbers. Like that is how I know how to work with it. So my quantitative data analysis, I mentioned before, is very simple. I usually use Excel, Google Sheets. I like a spreadsheet because a spreadsheet is going to allow me to organize my data. I can group bits of data into like, here's the data I collected on learning outcome 1. Here's the data on learning outcome 2. I can manipulate it and rearrange it to analyze it in different ways. So mostly when I use spreadsheets, I just get descriptive data. Usually I'm wanting to know the average, the mean. Like from a rubric, what was the average on that particular part of the rubric? Or from this set of exam questions, what was the average score on these questions? That's usually what I'm after. But you can get all kinds of other really great information from a spreadsheet. At times where you might have a lot of data or where you might have trouble identifying patterns in your data, you can even use spreadsheets to create visuals like charts, which might make it easier for you to identify trends or places where your students are struggling. Something worth mentioning is while, overall course grades, DFW rates, those are important pieces of information. Those don't tell us specifically, how well students performed at certain outcomes. Did they achieve that outcome? So it is necessary for us to drill down into specifics, into specific rubric elements or specific questions that align to a particular outcome. When we analyze qualitative data, as Gordon mentioned, here we might be working with, student comments. I know a lot of us survey our students, through the semester to see how they're doing. How did they like this exercise? Do they feel like it contributed to their learning? We can take student feedback and analyze it. Again, I like numbers. I got to turn this into numbers. So you can code it with themes. You might take it and organize these responses into like positive versus negative versus neutral. You can use things like word cloud generators to help you identify common themes. What are common words that are being used in your student responses? But importantly, our own reflections are critical. Like they're really important in our analysis of what's happening in our classes. And I just recently found out that if you record your reflections kind of regularly and in the same like systematically, that's publishable data. Like that is considered publishable. So your own reflections are valuable and can add a really important piece to your data.
So like, I sometimes will do a very informal survey of my class, like, what do you think was the most valuable thing that you learned? What's the least valuable thing or change? So I could use stuff like that to put in my assessment report.
Yes, you can. And actually, I think what we recommend is while you're going to use the quantitative piece to measure, like this is the bulk of it, this is what you're going to use to determine, did your students meet your outcome? You can add that qualitative bit. So like maybe you saw improvement in performance on a particular learning outcome, and from your students, you're hearing this activity in class really helped make that clear. Like you can take that, the student reflections, the student feedback, and you can add that to, I think, strengthen your report and really strengthen your overall conclusions from your data analysis.
You can also use the qualitative data to kind of inform the change you want to make. So we can have numbers that say students struggled on this thing, but if we don't know why they struggled, then how do we fix it? So getting that feedback qualitatively, maybe they'll tell you, what part of it didn't work out so you can fix that part and not have to just kind of throw darts at the wall and hope something changes.
Scott, I give a lot of exams because my students are ultimately going to sit for certifications. So it's going to have to be some sort of exam question they're going to see down in a testing center. And I talked to some of them privately because I found it interesting that they would do poorly on certain areas on an exam, that they would do great on a hands-on final. And the students told me qualitatively, I'm just not a good test taker. Like you set me in front of it and I can do it, but I second guess myself here and there. And some looking at their data for their actual tests proved that out and gave me an idea to be like, oh, okay, so maybe it's not that I need to reinforce this more. It's maybe I definitely need to make sure I'm doing more than just doing Blackboard exams, and I am doing hands-on exercises. So yeah, there's definitely a piece of those two coming together that can be very useful and paint a bigger picture.
I have a question to ask Scott. So like if we're doing like a group assessment because we're teaching the same class, but I did not do that survey that Scott did. Could we include it in there even though I didn't do it with the data I'm bringing?
I think I would, and I think I would just put numbers in there. So like as you're doing your course assessment report, you will probably include in that, I think it's one of the questions on there, it's like how many students like did you use here? How many are you looking at? And then you can add, like if you didn't use, if you have some that took the survey, you can say 18 out of 32 took this survey, and these were, some of the responses from the survey. Yeah. I thought of something. Oh, in biology, we started doing exam wrappers, which I have found really useful. So like when we hand out exams to students, we hand out essentially a survey, an exam wrapper. They complete it when they're done with their exam. And it asks them like, what strategies did you use to prepare? What did you find to be a difficult topic? But then I'll also add on there, like, maybe I tried something new this semester and I'll be like, what did you think of this? Do you think it helped you? You know, do you have any comments? I'll just use that to just get general feedback from my students about how well things went.
Okay. I do that kind of stuff just for my own knowledge of the class, but
Me too.
that it might be useful assessment as well.
Is that a blind survey? Like, are you
Um,
asking them without them knowing how well they did yet? How well they
Yes,
think
they
they
don't
did?
know, they don't
Oh,
know
okay.
how well they did. I don't usually ask them to like guess, did you get an A or a B? But I
Right.
ask them,
We did it first, and we
Yeah.
realized they were worried too much about what they did and not looking at how they prepared, because that's what
Yeah.
we wanted them to focus on.
You want to know
well
how to do the
prepared.
preparation? Okay.
but also when you're looking at your data, you know, you can combine this quantitative and qualitative piece, but you can also compare with other data. So if you've gotten data from IR, you can use that to support your conclusions. If you have other courses in your program or multiple sections of the same course with different instructors, you can compare this data. You can, even if you've got lots of sections, you can compile that data into one big assessment report. And basically with more numbers, just get, you know, maybe some more statistical power from those numbers.
Once again, if you missed the QR code, there it is.
So does anybody have tools that they,
What questions were in your wrapper?
oh, for me, it varies a lot, but we'll ask students, like, when did you start preparing for your exam? And, you know, sometimes it was last night, sometimes it was a few days ago, and sometimes it was since the start of the semester. We'll ask what methods they used as they were studying. And we have a little list for them to select, you know, like watch YouTube videos, Quizlet, like things like that. We'll ask, what else do we ask? I'll just ask general things like, you know, we did this new activity. Do you think it was helpful for your learning or somewhat helpful or not helpful? Or, you know, do you have any comments? Ask for those kinds of things. Did you guys do anything else?
Sometimes I'll ask, here are the chapters we covered, which one, like rank, which one was
Yeah,
easiest, hardest, or the other way, or however. you
yeah,
feel.
like difficult concepts. When did you find easy? What did you find difficult? And at the end of the semester, we ask, what's some advice you have for students next semester?
I'll also ask if, what would they change in their preparation?
Yes.
Great question.
Yeah, all right, so from the Padlet, let's see, we've got a lot of people that work with Scantron data. If you have, you know, multiple choice matching true false style exams, you get a lot of great data from the Scantron. I know a lot of people align Blackboard questions to their outcomes, and you can run reports and get that data well too. We've got some that are using Excel and rubrics. AI tools, I don't want to call James out. AI tools? Is that you, James? AI tools?
What is it?
It's,
Oh,
it
for
says
like-
James.
Yeah, that was me.
Yeah. Would you be willing to tell us what you do?
I would have it analyze the data that I give it. and then-
Okay.
And then have it spit it out in a way that's more reasonable. Fine-tune. But I would make sure that because AI is inconsistent, that we kind of have to have like, we have to probably have, yeah.
Josh, I feel like you tweak it and use it to make rubrics and stuff too, right? So you're using it for that too.
Really good thing, rubrics. You still have to grade them, but.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
All right, so we'll move into thinking about interpreting data. Casey is going to walk us through making sure we ask the right questions as we interpret our data so we draw the correct conclusions.
So, you guys all collect all kinds of information, right? What do you do with it? How does it help you? Yeah, the crickets, that's how most people feel at this point, right? See, the thing is, you can collect numbers all day long, but if they're not useful, then you've really just gone through the motions. So I've got an example that I took from the HLC's recent Gen Ed conference. But I want to go through some actual numbers with you. Don't worry, it's a short example. It's just a little math break. So I want to go through this and show you how asking different questions or analyzing your data slightly differently can lead to different results. I like to tell my students, though maybe I shouldn't admit this out loud, statistics don't lie, but statisticians do. And this is how. Though we're not actually lying on this, it's just when you change your question a little bit, it gives a different impression of your results.
Can you make it up on it for me?
Yeah. So here we have a class of 16 students. It's based on a rubric. You guys have seen those before. And in fact, it's based on a 4-point scale in a rubric. If any of you have been grading those portfolios, you've got a lot of experience with that, even if it's not in your own class. So we go through and we grade on the scale. We use the rubric. We collect all of these numbers. So what? What does it tell us? So for this one, they scored an average of 3.2. We even made a picture of it. But what does that tell us? Is that meaningful in any way? 3.2 what? Right? So it doesn't really help. We went through the motions, we made a pretty picture, but we didn't actually find useful data. Now, what if instead of talking about the overall average, what if we take the average of each column? So now we're talking about the individual indicators. That might be more useful, right? It'll at least tell us where the problems are. Now we have a better picture. Is it useful? Hopefully it's at least a little more useful. What can you tell me about that? What does that tell you just looking at the picture? It's not a trick question. Language and graphics look like they're problematic, right? But 2.8, 3.6, all those numbers in between, what do they mean? Is there any kind of significance to those numbers? Is 3 a cutoff for something? I don't know, because we haven't defined it, right? We didn't ask the right question. So what if, instead of getting an average for the column, we actually define what it means to pass, and then we can say how many of our students, or what percent of the students actually passed at whatever that threshold is. I believe for this one, it was 4, so proficient is what we're looking for. So 31.25% of the students were proficient at graphics. That is a much more useful piece of information, right? 2.9 or 2.8, that's not really telling us anything. But less than a third of the students are passing, that's more informative. So you still get the same idea that, organization is doing fairly well and language and graphics are problematic. We get similar results, but 2.8 isn't something we can act on, right? But 31%, that's something we can act on. That at least tells us, what are they doing? And if most of the students are not passing that particular thing, maybe we should spend some more time on graphics. All right, so there's your math break. I'll pause for more words.
All right. I thought that illustration of data analysis was great because that first graph of the total average, that I think that's kind of similar to saying like, well, this was the average on an exam, or this was the overall course average. And while that's useful data and it's important data to have, it doesn't give us any specific actionable data. But when we break down the data and start looking at it by topic, then we're able to really see like where did students struggle, where did students do well. So that's what we want to do as we interpret our data. We need to have a benchmark. We need to have a standard set because our data means nothing if we don't know what to compare it to. We need to make sure that our benchmark makes sense. Like, how are we going to determine if our students succeeded? Maybe it's set by an agency, maybe it's set by department, maybe you set it in your specific classes. But then you've got to ask, did students meet that benchmark? If your students meet your benchmark, that's awesome, and you should report it in your course assessments. That is a success in your class, and you need to make sure you state that. But because we are thinking about closing the loop and improving courses, we do need to look at the areas where students struggled as well. So we want to look where students struggled. Maybe they struggled with a particular learning outcome or multiple learning outcomes. When they struggled, what was the outcome they struggled with? And then you've really got to look back through the semester, like, well, what did you do to get the student to achieve that outcome? What were your course materials like? What assignments or course activities did you do? Is it something that's complicated? What assessment did you use? Was the assessment not defined well? Were the instructions confusing and the students just didn't know what you wanted them to do? So we want to look back through the semester when we find those concepts that students struggle with, and we want to try to figure out, like, well, what were the pieces that we had in place to lead our students up to achievement of that outcome?
I'd like to interject for a second here. More about asking the right question, but does the data you collect actually speak to the thing you want to know? I keep hearing about multiple choice tests, right? So if 95% of your students got the multiple choice test right, does that mean that they understood the material? Or does it mean that they're really good at multiple choice tests? Or the opposite, right? So sometimes just how we ask the question is going to change the information we get. It's not always going to be useful. And I know that from personal experience. I had to say 60% of my students failed a test one time because none of them read the instructions. It wasn't a reading test, it was a math test, but I have no idea what they thought about the math part because they didn't get past the reading. Food for thought.
All right, can you, or did you already? Yeah,
I
there
just
you
switched
go.
you. Yeah, switched you over. Yep,
All right.
yep.
Some other things as you're interpreting data, and I don't think we can really say this or stress this enough, is we should talk to each other. When we are analyzing data and finding places where students struggle, if you have colleagues you can talk to about that, they may see students struggling in those same areas. And when we get together and talk about these things, two heads are better than one, right? Like, we can come up with more creative ways to try to help our students out. Or maybe you have a colleague that changed something in their class and now their students are succeeding in that area. So we really need to come together more like this and share our experiences and share our successes with one another. And it doesn't even have to be in the same course or even the same field, because I think we support our students in more ways than just content. Our students just generally have similar struggles, and there are lots of ways that we can help them. So as you identify where your students are struggling, you do want to create an improvement plan. We have recently added the maintenance plan there. So if your students achieved the outcome, if they met that benchmark for success, you will develop a maintenance plan that just says, how are you going to keep them at that level? But if you have students that have not achieved the outcome, then you're going to develop an improvement plan. And again, this is just looking back through this semester. What are you going to tweak? What are you going to change? Are you going to add an assignment to try to clarify this topic? Are you going to change the instructions on an assignment so it's clearer for students and they know what you mean and what you're expecting? So that improvement plan is what we're going to then act on the next semester. So the last couple things that we had, I was going to just show you how I analyze my data. Patrick is going to show you how he does his from a program perspective. This was the last course assessment that we did, which I did mine, I think, in spring 2022, and I actually just got my results of that assessment back. And it turns out I shouldn't be up here because my scores were really bad. But this is how I did it. So I would just pull from exams. I would just pull, like I did this manually because I didn't have these in Blackboard. I would just pull questions that related to a particular outcome. I would label those with like, here's the topic that that question covered. What percent of my students got those correct? My benchmark was 70%. So if 70% or more got that question correct, I considered that a success. And then I started looking at the questions that students struggled with. And mostly I was finding that they were struggling with hard words, long words, chemistry words, words that they are just unfamiliar with. And so I, from this, developed a few in-class assignments and then also additional homework questions to try to help them sort those words out. But then I never assessed it again because this was the last assessment I did, so maybe that worked. But as you're sorting through your data, and I used Excel here, you may generate new questions. So, you know, here I was in microbiology looking at different types of infectious organisms and what their structures were. And as I was looking, I'm like, well, did students struggle with a particular type of microbe? And so then in Excel, you can rearrange your data really quickly and easily to just, you know, find answer other questions that you have as you're analyzing your data. Moving to the future, though. So in biology, what we're doing for a lot of our courses, especially courses that have multiple sections, is we're developing common assessments that can be given to every section. All the students in those sections will complete those common assessments. We developed rubrics that allow us to very quickly score those common assessments. And then we have a shared spreadsheet where we can all enter our data. And each question is linked to a particular learning outcome in our courses. And so I think this, if you can do this, if you can have one assessment, a final exam, a final project, a final assessment, something that is going to hit all or most of your learning outcomes, that will, for us, it's really streamlined this process. Where we can just all collectively look at our data together and analyze it very quickly. All right, and now Patrick is going to talk about program.
Okay, so I think we're running a little late. I promise to try to make this worth your while. This is my slide I put in. This is going to start me off, and it's also going to end me off. I was thinking earlier about Stephen Covey, begin with the end in mind, and this is where we're going to get to. But I want to show you some stuff. So I do a lot of hands-on exercises because, as I mentioned earlier, everything in IT is very test-driven, certification-driven, and students don't always do well with that. Plus, these days, more and more of the students are having to do some sort of simulation. When they take the test, it's just not a multiple-choice question. So I want to make sure they're getting the hands-on so they can remember that. Even from a test standpoint, they can say, oh, I did that in class. This answer is C, because they've done it. So I've got a hands-on final I'm going to show you all here in a second, but I want you to see I've thought about how it relates up to the courses and the program level. So I have this document, in part thanks to Scott Nicholas way back when it all started off. He made a hands-on final in the Microsoft classes when he was teaching it, and he was nice enough to give me a copy. If he hadn't, I would have just said, you know, it's the case method. But the thing that I like with this for my students, this is a giant activity they have to do. And if you're a program person and you're having to assess, I don't know, physical therapy, you're having to make them draw blood, you're having to make them create a program, you too can come up with a scenario. I'll send this to you. We can talk about how you can spin it yourself. But what I've tried to do is every single year, I've tried to think about the hands-on nature of things I could add into this. And it's gotten larger and larger and larger over the years, to where down here I have a section for the students that gives them a giant list of all the hands-on skills they are going to do. Oh, wow. Oh, sorry. Sorry, I didn't know. Maybe I got to do this first. My apologies. Yeah, I feel like an idiot now. Where was that? Here. Sorry. So all you missed was a bunch of scenario typed up. This is the important part. I give the students this document, and in this document, they may choose not to read this. But for me, I can look at this portion and say, these are all the skills I'm testing those students on. And I know you guys may not be IT people, but this is meaningful to me. It may be they do a correct blood draw for you. They do the correct dosage of medicine for you. This tells a, a slew of things I'm doing, not just in one class, but in four of my classes. And so, how I got there with this is I also give them this document and I say, hey, look, these are all the things I'm going to be assessing you on, which if they didn't read that far down, these are still all those same things. All of these things are, I can go behind them once they finished it and I can check them off or I can say they didn't do them. And so all of this stuff maps back to my program. This all comes back for me in my head when I was thinking through it. What are my program level outcomes? And those haven't been talked about a lot, but when my student graduates, I'm supposed to be able to show that they can install and configure a Windows Server hybrid network based on business needs, that they should be able to configure an Active Directory infrastructure. You maybe have 4, 5, 6 of these yourself. And then I looked at that and said, where am I introducing this stuff? And where am I formally assessing this stuff? And so in my case, when at all possible, I've chosen to formally assess these things with hands-on activities. Because when it comes to the whole Bloom's taxonomy, as Casey alluded to earlier with multiple choice, I can test for if they can identify something with multiple choice. But if I can make them actually install it, I'm a much higher level. They have to do it, not be a good guesser. And so to show you here, those are my program level outcomes. Here are the courses that it's going through here. These are the things at the course level the students have to be able to pull off here and do for me in this case. And so what I want to show you is down below here, I have all those different technologies for those 4 courses up there. These are all the course levels that map under my program levels. I've already started to figure out which pieces just those 4 courses do. Now, there's a couple of them that the courses don't assess. I have 15 courses, so other courses do it. But then I looked at that myself and said, which of those can I meaningfully do in a hands-on final? And I took away the checklist of it all. These are the individual things I had them doing that I'm checking off, and I have them mapped over to the particular course learning outcome to which they go. And you'll see I've color coded them. There's some green, there's some kind of reddish. If I scroll down here even further, there's actually a blue one down here. So this is, and you may already be doing this, I'm an oldie here, but if this is new to you or revolutionary, nothing says that a project you do in class can't go ahead and assess learning outcomes in other courses you may have at that exact same time. This particular hands-on final is hitting upon 3 different courses. It's not hitting upon all of my learning outcomes, but it's redundantly hitting upon a lot of them. My students take a lot of Blackboard exams because that's what Microsoft's going to test them on, and I want to make sure that they can go and set for those skills. But I also want to make sure if they're horrible test takers, this hands-on final can do a pretty good job of overlapping a lot of this. And I would prefer to assess them on what they can do as opposed to what they can memorize and know on a test, if that makes sense. So, when we were in there earlier, I was thinking about I don't know if Rob Atkins is in here, but I was thinking about his electronics program and all the things he could be doing and hitting up on in there. A lot of other people were talking about stuff. So this is, I would share this with you if you're interested, but this is oh yeah, there you are, Rob. Hey. But this is, I just think if you can think in your class a hands-on scenario, I feel like I was talking to Larry about the fact that Larry could tell his students look, you're going to have to serve a banquet for somebody and you're expected to do a 3-course meal. And one is going to be a soup and one's going to be a main course, one's going to be a dessert. And You don't necessarily have to pigeonhole them to what it is, but you can then say they all have to pair well with each other, and you can come up with a bunch of criteria. And we were talking about how like their knife skills from one class could be assessed here or formally assessed here. They were probably introduced and reinforced there, but you could formally assess this stuff here to be able to show that all your courses interweave. And it's not like they only do that one thing in that one course, that type of thing. So this is what I wanted to show and kind of let you all see the bigger picture of what I do. So in this, I have actually seen before where students can't, well, one semester they couldn't install this thing called Nano Server. And what I saw is they had poor performance on installing this one line here of Nano Server as well as on the questions. And that's a scripting and programming language thing. So the next time around, because these are taught once a year, I came back and made sure that in the introductory class where I introduced that technology, I spent more time, more practice with them, and these tests improved. So that was me trying to complete the loop, trying to figure out where I had those deficiencies, and having it broke up like this does allow me to see little areas. If I had just said, oh, well, you know what, like Casey was saying earlier, well, 70% was the average, that wouldn't have told me that. But because I was looking for each of these pieces, and I know where each of these pieces come from in my curriculum, and I know where they're introduced and reinforced, if something's up here, I can follow the trail back and try to see the root cause and try to make change there. Or, you know, I may try to make change that doesn't actually work. You know, it could be trial and error, but it allows you to see a deeper dive, not just in the silo of your individual course, if you have that ability. So I hope that's helpful. Now that you can actually see it, as to what I do in my class. So I'll go back over here to this and start this back up. There we go.
We do not want to keep you guys
Yep.
longer. Basically, there are challenges in data analysis. Some of the challenges that were shared by some of you on Padlet, finding the time to keep up with making sure all aspects of data conclusions and actions are followed up. That should be easier because from now on, you will be getting your course assessment reports back. There is a plan, there is a date set. By February, but I believe it's January, but by February, you should have your course assessment reports back. Let's see, adding a point value to subjective opinion. I find rubrics easiest for doing that. Lack of data from small class sizes, like that's something that I think all of us struggle with. Students just not submitting assignments, and so you just don't have a complete picture of how students are doing in your courses. So just some ways to overcome those challenges. You could go to the next slide. Yeah, make sure you have a plan. So if you do not have a plan for assessment next semester, try to do that prior to the beginning of the next semester. That way you can get maybe the most complete set of data to work with at the end of the semester. Remember the context of your course assessment. So things like small class sizes. You've probably had a weird group of students that just did weird stuff that you didn't expect. I don't know, like these things are important and you should put them in your assessment reports. So as you do your assessment and as you submit your report, you include your own observations. And maybe don't say my students were weird this semester, but just say, you know, I had a small group of students and unexpected things happened.
If you say that, make sure you quantify it by saying 3 of them were weird, 2 of them were not.
Yeah. So that's going to be a really important piece of information for us. All right. Collaborate. Again, can't say that enough. Talk to your peers. Hopefully with a CETL, we'll be coming together more often to actually talk to each other. And then if you do have questions, concerns, you need help, CETL, IR, and then the assessment committee is also available. All right. Do you guys have any questions?
There's the survey link if you didn't see it on your table.
All right. Thank you all. I'm sorry.
There you
2 hours left of training tomorrow, not today, tomorrow.